Behold the marvelous, confounding labyrinth of the avoidant psyche, particularly the intriguing secrets they hold about no contact. Gather around, if you please, for I assure you this story is no ordinary tale of heartbreak or silent telephones. No, my dear viewer, this is a far deeper plunge into the mysterious silent corners of the human mind, where trust wavers, emotions retreat, and the fortress of self-protection stands tall. Tonight, we shall step beyond the threshold of what we usually see in such matters, peel back the layers, and discover precisely what avoidance won't tell you about no contact. Let us begin by inviting you to imagine a grand stage, draped in heavy velvet curtains, lit by a single ghost light in the center. Now, from behind those curtains emerges an individual, elegant, perhaps aloof, someone whose outward demeanor might seem calm, even distant. This persona is our avoidant, and they carry a particularly weighty rucksack of experiences, beliefs, and well-guarded mysteries. The avoidant is often perceived as the stoic one in a relationship, the stiff upper lip sort who, when the going gets rough, might just vanish behind impenetrable emotional walls. As soon as emotional closeness creeps in, like a warm tide threatening the fortress gates, they withdraw, pulling away from intimacy like a cautious cat approaching a pond. Some call them commitment phobes, others label them emotionally unavailable. But for all the names, for all the assumptions, there is a subtlety and nuance in their behavior that is rarely addressed in the usual conversations. And oh, how painful it can be for those on the receiving end, for those who crave connection only to be met with a rather polite, methodical, or even abrupt cessation of contact. Yet, dear viewer, there is more to this story than meets the eye, because the avoidant is not merely running away from intimacy. No, they're also searching for a space where they can feel safe, a retreat from the swirling energies of overwhelming closeness. But let us not jump ahead of ourselves. After all, this is to be a slow, methodical exploration. Is it not? As dear Mr. Shakespeare once wrote, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. And so we must watch them play their parts. We have the avoidant, we have the one who pursues, and we have a swirling emotional dynamic that shapes the entire performance. Now, about the secrets. The term, no contact, tends to evoke a certain finality. It's that moment in many a heartbreak story where one partner declares, "I shall never speak to you again," or quietly steps away, refusing to return messages, calls, or even telepathic signals. In the context of an avoidant, no contact can carry an entirely different meaning. To the casual observer, it seems a relief for the avoidant. Finally, they are free from the claustrophobia of emotional closeness. But behind that fortress door, something else lurks. The avoidant might act as though they have thrown away the key, but in truth, they often peer out from the castle tower, anxious to see if anyone is still there, waiting, or if they truly are alone with their own echoes. Do keep that image in mind as we progress. The moat is vast, the walls tall, the gates drawn, yet the occupant inside still wonders, will they come back? Do I truly want them back? Or shall I remain here, safe in my solitude? Let us now delve into the tapestry of background stories. So often, the reason we become who we are in relationships stems from the emotional blueprint laid out in our early years. Perhaps an avoidant learned quite young that vulnerability led to pain. Perhaps they discovered that revealing their innermost needs would be met with disapproval or ridicule. To survive, to maintain a semblance of emotional equilibrium, they built those walls. It's akin to forging armor. You see, knights in ancient days wore chainmail, plating, or even a simple leather jerkin for protection. Our modern-day avoidant might not don steel, but they cloak themselves in emotional distance. When the world grows too close, too warm, it's time to raise that shield. Now, how does this relate to no contact, you ask? Well, When an avoidant has parted ways, perhaps after a series of misunderstandings, fights, or even a quiet fade, they may settle into this seemingly comfortable realm of silence. And yet, there's often an underlying narrative that they do not express. They may question themselves. Was I too distant? Should I have given more? Should I have exposed a little more of my heart? But admitting these vulnerabilities can feel like stepping onto a stage spotlighted in the harshest possible light, with the entire audience leaning forward in their seats, ready to judge. They've learned that such exposure can be perilous. So rather than confess to regret, fear, or confusion, they remain quiet, or they bury themselves in 1,000 distractions: work, hobbies, solitary pleasures. The phone remains silent, but there is a quiet hush within their own mind, a hush that says, if I do nothing, if I say nothing, then I can remain safe. This is the moment in our little tale where we must differentiate between no contact as typically understood, often employed as a healing tactic after breakups or toxic encounters, and no contact in the eyes of an avoidant. Usually one might think of no contact as a strategic period to heal one's wounds, to rediscover self-reliance, or to break addictive patterns of communication. That's well and good in many situations. But for the avoidant, no contact can be like an extension of their fundamental coping mechanism. It's not just a period to heal, it's a fortress to which they retreat. And in that fortress, the notion of being approached or confronted with emotional demands can feel akin to a siege. If they sense that someone might break through, they pull up the drawbridge. Silence. Emptiness. No more phone calls. No more text messages. No more fleeting glances at social media. Indeed, they might vanish so thoroughly you'd think they never existed. Yet here is the first secret they often will not tell you. In that fortress of solitude, they do not always feel the triumphant relief you might suspect. There can be an undercurrent of guilt, self-questioning, or even a twinge of longing. They're just so adept at tucking these feelings away that they appear to the world as if they have soared above the emotional drama. But behind those walls, the cogs in their mind spin relentlessly. Should I check their social media? Are they better off without me? Am I doing them a favor by staying away? They might even craft intricate rationalizations. I'm doing the mature thing by not stringing them along. Or, they never truly understood me, so what's the point of continuing this charade? But do not mistake rationalization for peace. Their sense of calm can be as brittle as old parchment. A single spark of nostalgia, a passing memory, can set their mind ablaze with doubt or pangs of what might have been. Allow me, if you will, to share a little allegory, a cautionary tale about an old acquaintance of mine. Purely fictional, mind you, though you might find traces of him in your own life's tapestry. Let us call him Sir Gregory, a charming gentleman of refined taste. He loved classical music, fine dining, and had a particular penchant for solitude. Sir Gregory had, on the surface, a delightful presence. He spoke with measured courtesy and had a knack for making people feel at ease, so long as they did not wander too close to his emotional epicenter. One day he crossed paths with a vibrant soul named Beatrice, warm, open-hearted, everything that he was not. She, being an empathetic being, fell for Sir Gregory's understated wit, his intellect, his subtle sense of humor. But as she drew nearer, he sensed the temperature rising, felt the closeness of her genuine curiosity about his private fears and desires. He did not quite know how to respond to her gentle attempts at emotional intimacy, so, bit by bit, he withdrew. He answered her texts with increasingly terse replies. He postponed meeting her family for weeks on end. Ultimately, the day came when Beatrice softly confronted him, longing for an emotional reassurance he could not provide. Instead of voicing his fear of vulnerability, Sir Gregory vanished. Poof, as if a puff of smoke whisked him away. No explanation, no heartfelt farewell, no contact whatsoever. He told his friends, half jokingly, that Beatrice was too needy, that he needed space to figure things out. And so the fortress gates clanged shut, leaving Beatrice standing outside, heart in her hands, bewildered. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. Sir Gregory kept to himself, burying his regrets in a whirlwind of work, solitary pastimes, endless reading. Over time, though, the memory of Beatrice crept upon him. He found himself wondering, was I too harsh? Did she truly want too much from me? Or is it just me, being me? Still, he did not reach out. His pride, his fear, his entire worldview had pivoted around the notion of preserving that fortress. Eventually, he heard through mutual acquaintances that Beatrice had moved on, found happiness, found someone who would share their heart openly. Then came the guilt, the quiet hush of regret. But in typical fashion, he locked that away too, never to be discussed openly. And so Sir Gregory's story stands as a microcosm of the avoidance approach to no contact. The outward expression, calm, rational, even stoic. The inward reality, a swirl of unexpressed emotion, fear of vulnerability, and quiet regrets that rarely, if ever, see the light of day. Now, dear viewer, let us truly dig into the heart of the matter, the hidden corners, the unspoken truths, the secrets that swirl around an avoidance mind in a state of no contact. Contrary to popular belief, many avoidants do keep a watchful eye on their former partners or even close friends from a distance. Through social media, through mutual acquaintances, or just by quietly storing memories in their mind. They might not admit it. Their pride won't let them, but curiosity often compels them. Are they better off without me? Is someone else fulfilling those emotional needs? The avoidant might not outwardly express these sentiments, but they linger beneath the surface. In the quiet hours of the night, the avoidant may stage a mock courtroom in their mind, offering logical justifications for why they vanished. I was never good at relationships. They deserved someone more affectionate. I need to focus on my career. Emotions hamper my creative process, and so on. It's not necessarily that these rationales are untrue. It's that they form a protective shield against the vulnerability of regret or heartbreak. To the outside observer, it may seem like the avoidant is celebrating their newfound freedom. In part, they are relieved. No more emotional demands, no more uncomfortable closeness. But in that same breath, there's a subtle sense of loss. Humans are, by nature, relational beings. Even the most stoic among us cannot thrive in complete isolation for too long. This unacknowledged loss can gnaw at them, leading them to wonder if they've made the right choice or if they're doomed to repeat an endless cycle of closeness, followed by withdrawal. That unwavering facade of certainty is, more often than not, a carefully cultivated act. Inside, they might question their decisions daily. Should I have sent that last text? Did I wait too long to respond? What if I pushed away someone genuinely special? But to admit these doubts, even to themselves, can be excruciating. So they push those thoughts aside, forging ahead with the narrative that this is for the best. After the end of a relationship or a close friendship, the avoidant might channel all their energies into a new hobby, a new job, a new project, something that can fill the space previously occupied by the relationship. This is not merely a desire to grow. Often it's a subconscious attempt to circumvent feelings of vulnerability or regret. They disappear into new worlds, each fortress built a little higher than the last. Let us pause for a moment and imagine that we could read the swirling tapestry of thoughts inside an avoidant's mind during no contact. Think of it as opening a dusty old tome, the pages yellowed with age, the lettering delicate. Silence is easier than confrontation. If they truly cared, they'd respect my need for space. I wonder if they're thinking about me. Should I check? No, best not to. If I reappear, it might complicate everything. Better to maintain the status quo. I miss them sometimes, but I can't go back now, can I? I don't want to face the awkwardness, the possible tears. It's simpler to leave things as they are. Am I heartless? No, just pragmatic, right? I must be sure not to slip. They might interpret any contact as a sign of willingness to open up again. I'm not ready. Sometimes I wish I could be different, but this is who I am. These hypothetical diary entries might not capture every nuance, but they illustrate the complexity beneath the avoidant stoic veneer. Where others see calm, inside there is often a roiling sea of conflicting impulses and unspoken desires. The avoidant cannot be fully understood without understanding their relational counterpart, the pursuer. Often, relationships that fall into no contact do so because of a dynamic in which one party chases emotional closeness while the other flees from it. This is the dance of the pursuer and the distancer, a tango as old as time. In many instances, it unfolds like this. The pursuer senses emotional distance from the avoidant and tries to close the gap, sending more messages, planning more dates, demanding more vulnerability. But the avoidant, threatened by this intensifying pressure, withdraws even further. They shorten their responses, dodge the emotional check-ins, and ultimately vanish. This, in turn, drives the pursuer into panic, confusion, or heartbreak, leading them either to chase harder or to adopt a forced, no-contact approach themselves, desperately hoping the avoidant will come back. Now, consider the avoidant's perspective in that dance. They feel cornered, like a fox hunted by hounds. Their flight is an act of survival, an attempt to preserve their sense of self without being swallowed by another's emotional intensity. But once they gain that distance, they stand on the hill, looking down at the valley they fled, and wonder if perhaps they left something precious behind. Yet, ironically, the more the pursuer tries to break through after no contact is established, the more the avoidant digs in, certain that emotional demands are lurking. Meanwhile, if the pursuer truly retreats, ceasing calls, texts, all attempts at contact, the avoidant may, after some time, begin to wonder, where have they gone? Why don't they care anymore? And so the cycle continues, a complex interplay of longing, fear, curiosity, and pride. Now, let us address the burning question that perhaps led you here. Is there any hope for reconnection? Is there a way to break this spell of avoidance and no contact? Certainly, not every story must end in tragedy. There can be hope, but it requires a level of awareness and courage from both sides. The avoidant must come to terms with their fears. This is no small feat, mind you. It can involve therapy, soul-searching, or life-altering experiences that crack open the fortress walls. And on the other side, the pursuer or the partner must learn to give space without resorting to guilt or overwhelming demands. Patience is not a passive act. It's an active choice to wait with kindness, to communicate gently, and to respect boundaries. For the avoidant, diving headlong into deep emotional waters can feel akin to leaping off a cliff. Instead, tiny steps can help, sharing small anecdotes of personal significance, opening up about mild insecurities, or simply practicing honest communication in bite-sized amounts. Over time, the avoidant may discover that vulnerability need not be a death sentence for their independence. For the non-avoidant partner, it's essential to examine one's own patterns. Are you pushing too hard for emotional availability on your timeline? Are you ignoring your own needs in the process? Healthy boundaries mean recognizing when your partner genuinely needs space and when their silence is crossing lines that harm you. Balancing compassion with self-preservation is key. Avoidants often fear being labeled the bad guy, the cold, unfeeling one. If the pursuer can shift the narrative from blame to empathy, I see you're scared, and I want to understand, the fortress walls might lower an inch. Likewise, the avoidant must realize that the pursuer's longing for closeness isn't a form of siege, but a desire for connection. It's a delicate dance, to be sure, fraught with potential pitfalls and heartbreak. But if both parties are willing, there can be a meeting ground between isolation and engulfment, where healthy relating is possible. Allow me to muse briefly on our modern era, replete with smartphones, social media platforms, and a ceaseless stream of digital noise. One might think technology would make no contact more difficult. Surely it's simpler now to peek at someone's online status or scroll their updates. Indeed, in many ways, it does. Avoidants can find themselves quietly lurking on an ex's profile or reading old text messages in a moment of nostalgia. Meanwhile, the pursuer can be driven mad by the knowledge that the avoidant is online, yet not responding. And yet technology also creates a perfect hiding place, an illusion of closeness without real vulnerability. Some avoidants take solace in silent browsing, reading about their former partner's life from a safe distance, never once sending a message. It's a curious phenomenon, this new brand of no contact in the digital realm. The outward stance remains silent, but the inward curiosity thrives like never before. In the future, we might see sophisticated means of blocking or ghosting, new ways to vanish digitally. But the core dynamic remains the same, a dance of closeness and distance, fear and longing, all swirling beneath the veneer of modern life. At this juncture, I am reminded of a conversation I once had with an old friend, a fellow who'd been through a tumultuous relationship with an avoidant partner. He told me, "You know, I used to think she just didn't care about me. But when we finally spoke years later, I realized she cared so much she was terrified of losing control of herself if she let me in. So her defense was to push me away first." Is that not a twist of irony? Sometimes those who appear so distant do so because they fear the pain of loss more acutely than we realize. They'd rather keep the drawbridge up indefinitely than allow anyone inside, only to risk that person leaving or betraying them. Another anecdote. A young woman once confided in me that she could not bear the idea of merging her life with someone else. Whenever a relationship started to blossom, she'd sabotage it by initiating no contact, fleeing at the first sign of deeper connection. After some soul-searching, she discovered that her parents' tumultuous marriage had ingrained in her a belief that intimacy equaled pain. Her no-contact approach was less about punishing her partner and more about protecting her most vulnerable self. Such stories illustrate that behind the seemingly inexplicable silence lie histories of hurt, learned patterns of self-protection. We can, if we try, see the humanity beneath the armor. That doesn't necessarily excuse the behavior or the heartbreak it causes, but it can illumine a path to empathy and, if circumstances allow, reconciliation. Have you ever noticed how many artists, writers, or thinkers channel their longing and isolation into their craft? It's no accident. Some avoidants find solace in artistic expression precisely because it allows them to communicate indirectly. A poet might pen verses of heartbreak, never admitting they are autobiographical. A painter might create a series of lonely landscapes, each painting capturing a fragment of the emotional desert within. A composer might craft a symphony of yearning, full of unresolved chords and haunting melodies. This, too, is one of the secrets. An avoidant might not speak to you directly about what they feel, but they might show you in a poem, a painting, or a composition. It's a silent confession, a subtle cry for understanding that they cannot bring themselves to articulate in conversation. If you happen to come across such creations, you might glean deeper insights into their inner world than any direct conversation would yield. We must also address a sobering reality. Sometimes no contact is not merely a phase, it is truly the end. For whatever reasons, be they betrayal, irreconcilable differences, or a profound mismatch of values, the avoidant decides that the healthiest path forward is a clean break. No messages, no attempts at reconciliation, no illusions of future reunions. In these cases, it's vital to recognize that not all avoidants will second-guess themselves. Some have grown so accustomed to their self-contained world that they adapt quite easily, forging a new path that excludes the partner entirely. If you find yourself in such a scenario, dear viewer, it's essential to respect that boundary. Clinging, chasing, or hoping for a miracle can prolong the pain. But remember, acceptance is not the same as hopelessness. You can accept that this person's journey diverged from yours without negating your own worth or potential for future happiness. Indeed, letting go can become an act of liberation for you and for them. Let us pause to consider practical advice for those who have been on the receiving end of no contact from an avoidant. The confusion, the heartbreak, the longing for closure, these can be overwhelming. Yet, ironically, pressing for closure from someone who has retreated may only drive them further away. In the early stages, pushing the avoidant to respond can backfire. They chose no contact for a reason, likely to preserve their sense of safety. Respect that boundary, at least temporarily, and focus on your own healing. Ask yourself, was I pursuing too strongly? Did I ignore signs of their discomfort? Or was this a pattern they've repeated in multiple relationships? Understanding the dynamic can help you navigate future relationships more wisely. Emotions can become a storm, swirling in your mind, leading to self-blame or regret. Talking to a therapist or trusted friends can provide perspective and emotional relief. Sometimes an objective viewpoint reveals that the avoidance behavior is rooted in their own history, not your failings. If, after some time, you still yearn for reconnection, proceed gently. Perhaps a brief, non-pressuring message, respectful and open. But be prepared for any outcome. They might respond positively, or they might remain silent. The key is not to stake your emotional well-being on their reaction. Heartbreak, as cruel as it can be, also offers a chance for profound personal growth. Ask yourself what this experience taught you about boundaries, empathy, self-love, and the complexity of human relationships. Each heartbreak can become a stepping stone to deeper self-awareness. Is it not remarkable that we invest so much emotional energy into not talking to each other? The very phrase, "no contact," implies a relationship of sorts. It's a deliberate action taken in response to strong feelings or circumstances. If there were truly no connection, we wouldn't bother labeling it no contact. We'd simply move on. Thus, ironically, no contact can become its own kind of bond, a tension-laden thread between two people who refuse to speak, yet cannot quite let go. The avoidant might cling to no contact as a means of preserving emotional distance, but in the process, they remain entangled with the memory of the person they've left behind. The pursuer, conversely, might struggle to break free from an unresponsive partner, waiting for some sign that the fortress gates could open. And so, even in silence, there is a kind of dialogue, one that resonates in the mind, day after day. It is this silent dialogue that can be both haunting and instructive. It forces each party to grapple with what they truly want, to confront the limitations of their relational patterns. Sometimes, that confrontation leads to personal transformation. Other times, it results in resignation or acceptance. But either way, the so-called emptiness of no contact is far from empty. And so, dear viewer, we come to the heart of our monologue, the concluding chapter of these swirling reflections on the secrets avoidance won't tell you about no contact. Let us gather our insights neatly. Avoidants retreat to feel safe. Their silence is often a fortress built from past wounds and fears of vulnerability. It is not necessarily a sign of hatred or malice. Rather, it's self-preservation. No contact isn't always peaceful. Beneath the calm exterior, avoidants may grapple with doubts, guilt, curiosity, or regret. They are not as devoid of feeling as they appear. Rationalizations abound. Instead of confronting the emotional turmoil, avoidants rely on logical justifications, telling themselves they've made the right choice. They may still keep tabs. Curiosity or residual feelings often lead them to quietly observe the person they left behind, even if they won't admit to it. Healing requires openness. True reconciliation or personal growth demands the courage to face fears, to communicate vulnerabilities, and to respect boundaries on both sides. Never again can sometimes mean exactly that. In certain cases, no contact might be the final chapter. Acceptance and self-care become paramount if you find yourself in such a situation. Growth emerges from silence. Whether the relationship revives or not, each party has the potential for transformation, learning about themselves, and forging healthier patterns. In weaving these themes, we've painted a picture of a complex emotional landscape, one in which silence speaks volumes, vulnerability is guarded, and hope lingers in the wings. Now, you might ask, what shall I do with these revelations? That, dear viewer, is entirely up to you. Perhaps you will use these insights to gently reapproach an avoidant friend or partner, or perhaps you will simply find solace in understanding that you were not at fault for someone else's retreat. Or maybe you will recognize the avoidant in yourself, and this will be the first step toward reevaluating your own boundaries and fears. Whatever your path, I invite you to carry these reflections with empathy. Behind every fortress is a story. Behind every silence, a fear or desire, and behind every heartbreak, a chance for deeper self-knowledge. Indeed, the monologue may end, but the conversation, both with ourselves and with those who matter to us, can continue if we are brave enough to engage in it. And as the curtain falls on our discourse, may you find in these words some measure of clarity, some measure of compassion, and perhaps even a spark of hope. For in the final reckoning, the truths we whisper in the silence often hold the key to the deeper connections we yearn for. If you've ever been enthralled by an avoidant's quiet mystique, or if you are that quiet soul longing for a moment of solace, let these revelations guide you toward understanding, and possibly toward healing. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May your relationships be ever wiser, your solitude ever more peaceful, and your heart ever more open to the nuanced dance of closeness and distance that defines the human experience.